Have you ever wondered what the exact color of a slowly dying dream is? I can tell you. It's beige, a specific soul-draining shade called corporate neutral. The color of the fabric walls of my cubicle, the color of the carpet tiles, and, I suspected, the color of my aura. My body was here, in this silent, air-conditioned box in Chicago, my fingers clicking, my eyes scanning columns of numbers that represented the flow of money for a company that sold something forgettable, like industrial-grade adhesives. But my mind? My mind was a world away, and 19 centuries ago. It was in a drafty English castle following Lady Annalise as she hid a coded letter in the silken lining of her gown. I could almost feel the chill of the stone walls, smell the beeswax candles, and hear the rustle of her dress. The spreadsheet in front of me dissolved. Column G wasn't accounts payable. It was the list of conspirators against the crown. The rhythmic tap of my keyboard wasn't data entry. It was the frantic heartbeat of my heroine as footsteps echoed down the hall. This was my secret. My real life, lived between the hours of midnight and 2 in the morning. By day, I was Elizabeth Vance, junior accountant, a ghost in a gray pantsuit. By night, I was Ellie Vance, architect of worlds. For 10 years, I had built empires and brought them to ruin on my laptop screen. For 10 years, I had sent my creations out into the world, only to receive them back with polite, sterile rejection letters that all said the same thing in 100 different ways. Thanks, but no thanks. My lunch hour was my only sanctuary during the day. I never went to the break room. That was a place of loud chewing and forced conversations about weekend plans. Instead, I ate at my desk, a sad salad in a plastic container, using the precious 60 minutes to edit a chapter or research the proper way to address a 19th century duke. Today was no different. The salad was limp, the office was humming its monotonous fluorescent song, and I was just about to lose myself in Annalise's escape from the castle tower. That's when my phone buzzed. A New York number I didn't recognize. Probably a scam call wanting to talk about my car's extended warranty. I almost ignored it, my finger hovering over the decline button, eager to get back to my fictional world. But something made me pause. A flicker of that stupid, stubborn hope that refused to be extinguished by years of rejection. What if? I answered, my voice a quiet, hesitant, "Hello?" A man's voice, crisp and professional, came through the line. Am I speaking with Elizabeth Vance? My heart gave a little jolt. This didn't sound like a scammer. Yes, this is she, I said, my posture straightening. I was suddenly aware of the cubicles around me, the potential for eavesdroppers. My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm a literary agent with Sterling and Finch. I'm calling about a manuscript you submitted to us a few months ago. The Silk Cage. The world tilted on its axis. The humming of the lights faded to nothing. Arthur Sterling. I knew that name. It had been on at least 3 of my most crushing rejection letters. I could barely breathe. My manuscript. He was calling about my manuscript. This was new. Rejections came by email, never by phone. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry as dust. Yes, I managed to whisper. I remember. He chuckled, a warm, reassuring sound. Well, Ms. Vance, I'm not sure how to tell you this, so I'll just say it. I read it. I loved it. I passed it along to an editor I know at Morrison Publishing, and she loved it too. In fact, she stayed up all night to finish it. He paused, and in that silence, I felt my entire life holding its breath. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every ounce of belief I had poured into my secret world, it all hung suspended in that moment. They want to make an offer, Elizabeth, he said, his voice gentle now. Morrison wants to publish The Silk Cage. They're prepared to offer you a contract. and an advance of $50,000. I stopped breathing altogether. $50,000. The number echoed in the sudden vast silence of my mind. It wasn't a number from a spreadsheet. It was a real number, aimed at me, at the ghost in the cubicle. I must have been silent for too long because he prompted, "Elizabeth, are you still there?" I made a sound, a choked gasp that was half laugh, half sob. "Yes, I'm here." I stared at the beige wall of my cubicle, but I wasn't seeing it anymore. I was seeing a bookstore, a shelf, and a book with my name on the spine. This wasn't just money that would let me pay off my student loans or fix my car. This was validation. It was proof. The whispered words I had only dared to say to myself in the dead of night were suddenly, blindingly true. I am a writer, a real writer. Have you ever tried to hold a piece of impossible joy in your hands? It feels like carrying a bubble. You're so terrified it will pop that you can barely breathe. That was me, driving to my parents' house, the words, $50,000 echoing in my car. It wasn't just a number. It was a password to a new life, and I clutched it to my chest, afraid the slightest bump in the road might shatter it. I rehearsed the announcement in my head, imagining their shock, their pride. For once, I wouldn't be their quiet, sensible Ellie. I would be a success. I walked into the familiar smell of Mom's pot roast and the sound of the television. My parents were soft people, their edges worn smooth by a lifetime of avoiding conflict. They greeted me with gentle hugs and mild questions about my week. "How's work, honey?" Dad asked, his eyes already drifting back to the game show on TV. "Fine, Dad. Same old," I replied. This was our ritual, a conversational dance of comfortable beige-colored topics. But tonight, I was going to change the music. I took a deep breath, the bubble of my news shimmering in my throat. "I actually have some news," I began, my voice higher than usual. They both turned to me, their expressions patient. "It's about my writing. I, I sold my book." My mom blinked. "You sold it? Like, to a store?" I almost laughed. "No, Mom, to a publisher. A big one in New York. They're going to print it and sell it everywhere." A slow smile spread across my dad's face. "Well, isn't that something? Good for you, Ellie. We knew that little hobby of yours would pay off eventually." Hobby. The word landed like a small, dull stone. "It's more than that," I pressed on, determined to make them see. "They gave me an advance. $50,000. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever experienced in this house. My dad put down his remote. My mom's hands stilled in her lap. They stared at me, not with joy, but with a profound, almost clinical confusion. "50,000? My mom whispered, as if I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. "For one book? Are you sure, Elizabeth? That seems like an awful lot of money." Their reaction wasn't pride. It was disbelief, as if I'd just confessed to a successful bank heist. Just as I was trying to find the words to explain that yes, this was real, the phone rang, shrill and demanding. My mom checked the caller ID. "Oh, it's Carol," she said, her voice instantly laced with concern. She put the phone on speaker, a habit of hers. "Carol, what's wrong? You sound awful." My aunt's voice flooded the room, thick with theatrical sobs. "It's Jessica. She didn't get it. The part was perfect for her. She worked for weeks. And they gave it to someone else. She's devastated, just devastated." Instantly, the entire emotional atmosphere of the room shifted. My father muted the TV. My mother leaned forward, her face a mask of empathy. "Oh, the poor thing," she cooed. "She's just so talented, they're blind not to see it." The conversation was a torrent of sympathy and outrage on Jessica's behalf. My aunt detailed every tear, every doubt my cousin was having about her career, her life, her dwindling bank account in the most expensive city in America. Los Angeles was a monster, Hollywood was cruel, and Jessica was its beautiful, tragic victim. I sat on the sofa, my $50,000 news dissolving into thin air. It hadn't just been put on the back burner, it had been tossed out the window. My parents, who had looked at my life-changing success with blank confusion, were now completely engaged, animated by the familiar drama of Jessica's struggle. They offered suggestions, made sympathetic noises, and shook their heads at the injustice of it all. I didn't exist. My achievement, the culmination of a decade of secret, lonely work, had been completely and utterly erased in less than 5 minutes by a single phone call. I was the understudy again, watching from the wings as the spotlight swung, as it always did, to the star. Do you know what happens when a bomb goes off in a quiet room? For a split second, there's no sound. Just a silent, brilliant flash of light and pressure before the noise and destruction rush in. That's what it felt like when my Aunt Carol arrived the next day. She didn't call first. She just appeared, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and focused intent, her smile as bright and dangerous as that initial flash. She was here to detonate my life, and she was going to do it with a hug. My parents ushered her in as if she were visiting royalty, seating her in my dad's armchair, the throne of our modest living room. I was summoned from my bedroom and sat on the couch opposite her, my parents flanking me like two nervous guards. "Ellie, sweetie," Carol began, her voice a syrupy confection of warmth. "Your mother told me your wonderful news. A book. I am just bursting with pride. To have so much talent in one family, it's a miracle." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. It wasn't the look of pride, it was the look of a predator that had just cornered its meal. She spent a few minutes lavishing me with praise that felt like sandpaper on my skin. She called my writing brave and my success inspiring. My parents nodded along, their faces soft with relief that Carol was being so positive. They didn't see the architecture of the trap being built around me. They just saw a happy family moment. Then, with the practiced skill of a surgeon, Carol made her first incision. You know, when I heard the news, the first thing I thought was, this is a sign. It's a sign from the universe. A sign for what? I asked, my voice small. Carol's smile widened, encompassing me, the room, the entire universe she had just invoked. A sign for Jessica, of course. Your success. It's not just for you, sweetie. It's for the family. It's the answer to our prayers. She laid out the problem with dramatic flair. Jessica was on the verge of a breakthrough, but she was also on the verge of collapse. There was one man, a legendary acting coach in Hollywood, who could change everything. His classes were exclusive, transformative, and, naturally, cost a fortune. I felt a cold dread begin to pool in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I watched as she painted a picture of Jessica's brilliant future, a future that was just one small step away. He only takes 10 students a year, and he wants to see her. This is her one shot, Ellie. But the tuition, it's astronomical. A real king's ransom. She let the words hang in the air, a beautiful, tragic problem with no solution. And then, she turned her dazzling smile back to me, the grand finale of her performance, the perfect solution. "And then you called? With your incredible news? It was like a thunderbolt from heaven," she declared, her hands clasped together. "Ellie, darling, your talent is the key to unlocking Jessica's. Your advance, that $50,000, it could change her life. It could be the investment that makes her a star." She said it so simply, so reasonably, as if she were suggesting I pass the salt at the dinner table. She sat back, her expression one of beatific generosity, as if she had just gifted me the opportunity to perform a great and noble deed. My father stared at his hands, My mother gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. They were all looking at me, waiting for me to say yes. What's the quietest sound in the world? It's the sound of a family holding its breath, waiting for you to give them the answer they've already decided on. The air in the living room was thick with it, a suffocating pressure of expectation. I could feel their collective will pushing on me, a physical force. My aunt's smile was a fixed, painted thing, and my parents looked at me with a kind of pleading terror. Say yes. Their eyes begged. Just say yes and make this easy. For the first time in my life, I decided to make it hard. No, I said. The word was tiny, barely a whisper, but it landed in the silence with the force of a gunshot. Aunt Carol, I can't. I kept my voice steady, polite, but firm. I looked from her shocked face to my parents. This money, it isn't a lottery win. It's the first paycheck I've ever earned for something I love. It's my chance to change my life. I had to make them understand. This is my chance to finally quit my job, to hire a professional editor for my next book, maybe even take a research trip to England. This is my start. The warmth evaporated from Aunt Carol's face so fast it was like watching a light bulb burn out. Her smile didn't just fade, it curdled, tightening into a thin, bloodless line. Her eyes, which moments before had been sparkling with false pride, turned to chips of ice. I see, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous temperature. So that's how it is. After all these years. You've always been jealous of her, haven't you? Hiding in your room with your little stories while she was out there, bleeding for her art. The accusation hit me with the force of a slap. Jealous? I was the one who had cheered the loudest at every one of her school plays, the one who had helped her run lines until 3 in the morning. That's not true, I said, but my voice trembled. Carol leaned forward, the predator now fully revealed. Isn't it? Jessica is a real artist, Elizabeth. She puts her entire soul on the line for a single audition. What do? You sit at a computer. For her, this is life and death. For you, it's just money. It's just a game. That was it. That was the heart of it all. My work, my decade of discipline, my world building and sleepless nights. It was a game. A hobby that had accidentally produced cash. And that cash was now supposed to be funneled into the service of the real talent. I looked to my parents for support, for any sign that they saw the injustice of this, but my mother just wrung her hands. Ellie, honey, she said softly, just think about it. It's for family. My father cleared his throat. Your aunt has a point. Jessica's really struggling. We have to help each other. They weren't defending me. They were trying to manage me, to smooth my sharp edges until I fit back into the role they had cast for me. The supportive one, the quiet one, the one who pays. There are different kinds of weapons. My aunt's was a battle axe, swung with fury and open aggression. My cousin's was a stiletto, slender and sharp, slipped between your ribs when you were leaning in for a hug. The call came 2 days after the disastrous meeting with Carol. I saw the Los Angeles area code and my stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. I knew this was the next wave of the assault, but I wasn't prepared for the change in tactics. This wasn't going to be a frontal attack. This was going to be an infiltration. Ellie? Her voice was a ghost of itself, frayed and thin, cracking on my name. It wasn't the voice of Jessica, the future star. It was the voice of Jess, the 7-year-old who'd fallen off her bike and was trying not to cry. My defenses, so rigid and strong against Carol's rage, instantly began to soften. Jess? What is it? Are you okay? A muffled sob came through the line, a sound designed to bypass logic and go straight to the heart. No, I'm not okay, Elle. I'm really, really not. She didn't mention Aunt Carol. She didn't mention money. She just talked. She painted a picture of her life in Hollywood with heartbreaking detail. The tiny, overpriced apartment where the landlord was threatening eviction. The diet of instant noodles and desperation. The endless cycle of auditions where she was told she was too pretty, not pretty enough, too short, too tall. She spoke of the crushing loneliness, of being a nobody in a city full of people pretending to be somebody. It was a perfect monologue of a broken dream. Then, just as my heart was aching with a familiar, conditioned sympathy, she deployed her sharpest weapon, our past. "Remember when we were kids?" she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "We'd hide in the attic and you'd write those amazing plays for me. I was a queen, and you were the sorceress who gave me all the best lines. I never told you this, but even back then, I knew your magic was the realest thing in our family." She made me her confidant, her co-conspirator, the secret source of her own power. She made us a team again. And then, the stiletto. "I just feel so close, you know? There's this one chance, this incredible acting coach. It's a silly dream, I know." She let out a small, self-deprecating laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "It's not for people like me, it's for people who get a lucky break, a sign that they're on the right path. If I just had a sign, Elle, if I had just one chance, I know I could make it all worth it." The words hung in the air between us. "You got the lucky break. You are the sign." She wasn't asking for money. She was asking me to fulfill a cosmic destiny that she had just invented. My mind was screaming. It's a performance. It's the same script, just a different actress. But my heart wouldn't listen. This was Jess, the girl who held my hand on the first day of school. The girl I had shared every childhood secret with. The fierce resolve I'd felt when facing my aunt felt petty and cruel in the face of my cousin's raw pain. My firm no was a fortress against an army, but it felt like it was made of paper against a single, crying child at the gate. My throat was tight, my chest aching with a terrible, tearing sympathy. The call ended with a final, devastating blow. "I shouldn't have bothered you," she whispered, as if gathering the last of her strength. I think I'm done, Elle. I think I'm going to pack my bags and come home. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who might understand what it feels like to give up on the only thing you've ever wanted." She hung up, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any screaming match. She hadn't asked me for a dime. She had asked me to be the author of her failure, and my heart, against all reason, was breaking. What is the half-life of emotional poison? Jessica's tear-filled voice had a long one. For 2 days it had been decaying in my bloodstream, leaving a toxic residue of guilt and pity. My resolve, which had felt like granite in the face of my aunt's fury, now felt like sandstone, crumbling under a steady drip of expertly applied sentiment. I saw Jessica's face every time I closed my eyes, not the glamorous actress, but the little girl in the attic, looking at me with absolute faith. How do you say no to that? How do you protect your own dream when you're being accused of murdering someone else's? The answer arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a credit card offer and a pizza flyer. It was a thick, 9 by 12 manila envelope with the crisp, intimidating letterhead of Morrison Publishing in the top left corner. It felt impossibly heavy, as if the paper were woven from something more substantial than wood pulp. I carried it inside, my fingers tracing the raised lettering of the address. This was real. This wasn't a phantom promise, or a tearful, manipulative phone call. It was a physical object, a weight in my hands, an anchor in the storm of guilt that was threatening to pull me under. I sat at my small kitchen table and opened it carefully, not wanting to tear the paper. Inside was a stack of at least 20 pages, dense with single-spaced, impenetrable legalese. It was my authorial agreement, the contract. I started to read, my eyes skimming over clauses about subsidiary rights and foreign translations. Most of it was a language I didn't understand, but then, scattered like jewels in the dense text, I found the words that mattered. They were the words that changed everything. A single line leaped out. Elizabeth Vance, hereinafter referred to as the author, not the accountant, not Carol's niece or Jessica's cousin. The author. It was a title, a legal designation, my new name. Then another phrase, the author shall retain full and final creative control. Creative control. In a life where I felt I had none, where my own family was trying to control my finances and my future, this document declared my authority absolute. Morrison Publishing shall have the exclusive option on the author's next full-length work of fiction. The next one. They didn't see this as a fluke. They were betting on my future. I leaned back in my chair, the pages spread out before me like a sacred text. This wasn't just a business proposal. This was a constitution for a new country, and I was its sole citizen. The $50,000 wasn't a windfall. It was a salary. And I suddenly remembered, with a clarity that felt like a physical blow, exactly how I had earned it. I remembered the thousands of nights I had set my alarm for 4 in the morning, just to get 2 hours of writing in before my soul-crushing day job. I remembered the taste of burned coffee and the constant, dull ache in my lower back from my cheap desk chair. I remembered one Christmas, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. The whole family was there. Aunt Carol, glass of wine in hand, had asked me in front of everyone, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Ellie, darling, are you still scribbling away on that little computer of yours? Working on the next great American hobby?" Jessica had giggled, a bright, tinkling sound. "Be nice, Mom," she'd said. "Maybe one day she'll write a story about a really interesting accountant." They had all laughed. Not cruelly, just dismissively, the way you laugh at a child's absurd ambitions to become an astronaut. My parents had just smiled weakly, offering no defense. Holding the contract, the memory of that laughter no longer stung. It enraged me. The pity I had felt for Jessica, that corrosive, weakening emotion, began to burn away, replaced by the clean, hot fire of anger. Her phone call wasn't a cry for help from a struggling artist. It was another verse of the same old song. Ellie's thing isn't real. It's a hobby. It's a cute little game that accidentally paid out. Now hand over the jackpot to the real performer. This contract in my hands wasn't just paper. It was proof. It was the collected evidence of 10 years of invisible, thankless, solitary work. And I would not let them trivialize it. I would not let them take it. It was my story, and I was finally going to be the one to write the ending. Have you ever discovered that your life isn't a story, but a script? And that you've been playing the same part over and over, without ever realizing the show had begun? My newfound anger was a strange, restless energy, and it led me to the back of my closet, to a dusty cardboard box I hadn't opened in over a decade. It was my time capsule, filled with the ghosts of the person I used to be. I pried open the lid, releasing the faint, sweet smell of old paper and decaying glue. This wasn't just a box. It was a crime scene, and I was finally ready to examine the evidence. Inside, beneath a layer of hardened clay sculptures from art class, was a stack of my old-school notebooks, their pages filled with my neat, careful cursive. Stories about talking animals, lonely princesses, and girls who could fly. Tucked among them was the program for the 8th grade production of The Wizard of Oz. I found Jessica's name almost immediately, in big, bold letters. Dorothy Gale, Jessica Vance. I scanned the rest of the cast list, my eyes searching for my own name. I found it at the very bottom, in tiny print, under the heading Production Crew. Assistant Stage Manager. I wasn't even a tree. I was invisible. I remembered that spring with a sudden, painful clarity. Jessica, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, her voice making the entire gymnasium fall silent. And me, standing in the dusty, dark wings, holding a clipboard, making sure the boy playing the Cowardly Lion didn't miss his cue. I remember Aunt Carol telling my parents, "She has a gift. A true, God-given gift." No one ever asked me if I wanted to be on stage. It was simply understood that Jessica was the performer, and I was the audience. The reliable, quiet, backstage support. The understudy for a life I was never meant to live. Deeper in the box, I found it. A faded, tri-fold brochure for a 2-week summer camp in Vermont called The Young Writers' Workshop. I was 14. I had found this brochure in the library, and it had become my holy grail. I'd read it 100 times, dreaming of cabins filled with kids like me, of bonfires and poetry readings, of a place where being a scribbler wasn't a weird hobby, but a calling. My parents had even agreed. They'd set aside the $200, a significant sum for them, and promised I could go. It was the only thing I had ever wanted that badly. Then came the phone call from Aunt Carol. Jessica had been offered a spot in a prestigious pre-professional acting intensive in the city. It was a huge opportunity, but it was expensive. New headshots were needed, special dance shoes, a costume fee. I can still hear my aunt's voice, a symphony of logic and emotional blackmail, explaining to my parents how this was a critical investment in Jessica's future. How my little writing camp was sweet, but Jessica's workshop was a career move. How one was a childish dream, and the other was a down payment on stardom. My parents sat me down in the living room, their faces etched with that familiar, gentle apology. They explained that family had to make sacrifices for each other. They said that my camp was lovely, but Jessica's need was more urgent, more real. They took the $200 they had saved for me and gave it to Carol for Jessica's acting classes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded. Because that's what I had been trained to do. I understood my role. I was the understudy, and the star always got the spotlight. The star always got the money. Holding that faded brochure in my hands, the pieces of my life clicked into place with the horrifying sound of a prison door slamming shut. This wasn't a new demand. This was a pattern. A system, perfected over decades. The $50,000 wasn't a shocking one-time request. It was just the $200 from my writing camp, adjusted for inflation. The guilt I'd been feeling for saying no, the pity that had been tearing me apart. It all vanished, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard certainty. This was never about helping Jessica. It was about keeping me in the wings. What if the people who are supposed to be your allies are actually the enemy? And what if the family you were born into isn't your real family at all? The realization that had dawned on me in the dusty confines of my closet had left me with a strange and terrifying freedom. I had spent my entire life trying to win the approval of a closed, toxic circle. Now that I knew I would never have it, and that I no longer wanted it, I was adrift. So I did something I had never done before. I reached out to strangers. I sent a short, professional email to my new agent, Arthur Sterling, and asked if we could schedule a call with my editor to discuss the next steps. The meeting was a video conference, a small window on my laptop that felt like a portal to another universe. On one side was my cramped Chicago apartment, with its slightly crooked blinds and pile of library books. On the other were two faces in bright, professional-looking offices in New York City. Arthur Sterling, the agent, was exactly as I'd imagined. Sharp, silver-haired, with a calm authority that immediately put me at ease. And next to him was a woman with vibrant red hair and intelligent, laughing eyes. "Elizabeth," Arthur said warmly, "this is Catherine Russo, your editor at Morrison. Kate, this is our brilliant author. Brilliant author. The words landed so casually, so factually, that I almost didn't know what to do with them. Before I could even process it, Catherine leaned into her camera, her enthusiasm so palpable it felt like it was radiating through the screen. Elizabeth, I am so thrilled to finally meet you. I have to tell you, I haven't been this excited about a debut novel in years. The way you built the political intrigue in The Silk Cage, the texture of the world, and Lady Annalise? My God, what a character. She's so complex and strong, but also incredibly vulnerable. I feel like I know her. My family had spoken of my book as if it were a winning lottery ticket, a random object of value. But Catherine was talking about the work. She was talking about the characters I had lived with for years, the plot points I had agonized over at 3 in the morning. She saw the architecture, the hours of research, the invisible threads I had woven together. We spent the next hour not talking about money, but about the story. We talked about marketing plans, about cover art concepts, about the kind of readers who would love Annalise as much as we did. They treated my opinions not as suggestions, but as directives. Then came the moment that changed everything. So, Kate and I have been talking, Arthur said, a slight smile playing on his lips. And we're both dying to know. Where do you see this story going? Because we both agree, there is absolutely the potential for a sequel. Or even a trilogy. A sequel. They weren't just investing in the book I had already written. They were investing in the books I hadn't even thought of yet. They saw a future for me. A career. They saw a professional. An equal. A creator they wanted to be in business with for the long haul. It was like breathing pure oxygen after a lifetime in a stuffy, airless room. This was a world where my scribbling was considered an asset, where my hobby was a profession, where my passion wasn't something to be dismissed, but something to be celebrated and amplified. They didn't see me as a source of funds for someone else's dream. They saw me as the dream itself. As I listened to them brainstorm, their excitement fueling my own, I felt a new kind of strength solidify in my chest, a confidence I had never known. I closed the laptop after we said our goodbyes, but the feeling lingered. I finally had allies. I finally had a tribe. And for the first time, I felt ready for the war that I knew was coming. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air change, the way the pressure drops right before a violent storm? That's what it was like stepping into my parents' living room. It wasn't an ambush in the physical sense. No one was hiding behind the furniture, but it was an ambush of the soul. They were all there, a united front arranged on the sofa. My Aunt Carol in the middle, a general commanding her troops, with my mother and father flanking her, their faces pale and anxious. They had saved the hard, upright armchair for me, the one that felt like a witness stand. Carol began with a tactic I hadn't expected, a deep, sorrowful sigh. "Elizabeth, we are so worried about you," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of practiced concern a doctor uses before delivering terrible news. This money, this book deal, it's changing you. You're becoming hard, selfish. It's not the Ellie we know and love." My parents nodded in solemn agreement, their eyes filled with a gentle, sorrowful disappointment that was 1,000 times more painful than anger. They weren't angry with me. They were sad for me, for the person I was failing to be. I said nothing. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and listened. I was no longer the girl who would crumble under the weight of their disapproval. The conversation with Arthur and Catherine had been like a vaccine, inoculating me against this specific strain of emotional poison. They had called me a brilliant author. These people, my family, were calling me a bad person for finally believing it. The contrast was so stark, so blindingly clear, that for the first time, Their words had no power over me, they were just noise. Seeing her feigned concern wasn't working, Carol moved to her final, most powerful weapon, the ultimatum. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine, her voice dropping to a near whisper, charged with dramatic intensity. Jessica is packing her bags, Elizabeth. She's given up. She's going to come home, get a job waiting tables, and spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. And I want you to understand this. Her broken dream, her shattered spirit, that will be entirely on your conscience. Can you live with that? Can you, in good conscience, build your little career on the ruins of your cousin's life? A year ago, even a week ago, that would have destroyed me. But as she spoke, all I could see was the dusty brochure for my writer's camp. All I could hear was the echo of my agent's voice saying the word trilogy. I saw the two paths laid out before me with perfect clarity. One was a well-worn track leading back into the shadows of the wings, where I would always be the quiet, supportive helper. The other was a terrifying, unlit path leading onto the main stage, a stage I would have to claim for myself. And in that moment, I made my choice. I stood up. It was a small movement, but it shifted the entire balance of power in the room. I was no longer the defendant in the witness stand. No, I said, my voice quiet, but as solid and unmoving as a stone. They all stared at me, shocked by the interruption. My money is my money. I looked at my parents, then at Carol. My career is my career. It is not a piggy bank for Jessica's ambitions, and it is not built on her ruins. It is built on my work. I took a breath, the air tasting of freedom. If you cannot accept that, if you cannot be happy for me, for my success, without trying to take it from me, then we have nothing more to talk about. How much does a life weigh? The one you're supposed to live, the one that's been chosen for you by people who love you, or at least say they do. I think it weighs about as much as the silence in my car after I left my parents' house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I simply walked out, leaving my ultimatum hanging in the air behind me, a statement of fact that required no response. The silence that followed me wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy, and yet, for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. My first stop was not my apartment. It was the bank. The building was a temple of cold marble and quiet efficiency, a place where emotions were irrelevant and only numbers mattered. It was the perfect sanctuary. I walked up to the teller, a young woman with a polite, impersonal smile. I didn't need her help, just a private cubicle with a computer. I sat down and logged into my account. There it was, a number on a screen, a string of digits that had caused so much chaos. $50,000. It looked unreal, a typo in the code of my life. For a moment, I saw it splintering into 1,000 different pieces, headshots for Jessica, acting classes, a down payment on a dream that wasn't mine. But then I saw the faces of Arthur and Catherine, heard their voices talking about a sequel, a career, a future. I took a deep breath, the sterile, air-conditioned air filling my lungs. I clicked the button to transfer funds. I moved every single cent of the advance from my checking account, a place of daily transactions and easy access, into my savings account, a place I had labeled the future. It was a simple, 2-second transaction, but it felt like I was slamming a vault door shut, locking my new life safely inside, away from the hands that had been trying to pick its lock ever since it had arrived. My next stop was the office. Driving through the familiar Chicago streets, I saw the city with a sudden, startling clarity. The gray buildings, the anonymous crowds, the relentless rhythm of commerce. It had always felt oppressive, a concrete expression of my own beige existence. But today, it was just a backdrop. It was a stage I was preparing to exit. I walked into the building, the security guard giving me the same non-committal nod he'd given me every day for the past 8 years. Nothing had changed here, but everything had changed in me. The familiar fluorescent hum of the office no longer sounded like a death knell, it sounded like a memory. I didn't go to my cubicle. I went directly to my manager's office and gave him my 2 weeks' notice, a courtesy I didn't have to extend but did anyway. Then I returned to my small fabric-walled box. I looked at the spreadsheets, the piles of invoices, the corporate-approved motivational poster on the wall that said teamwork. It was a life raft I had clung to for years, believing it was the only thing keeping me afloat. Now I saw it for what it was, an anchor. I packed my belongings into a cardboard box, a chipped coffee mug, a framed photo of a beach I'd never been to, a wilting succulent, and the dog-eared copy of a history book I'd been using for research. That was it. 8 years of my life, fitting neatly into a small box. Carrying it in my arms, I walked out of the office, past the rows of my silent typing colleagues. No one looked up. I was already a ghost. The automatic glass doors of the lobby slid open with a soft whoosh, and I stepped outside. The afternoon sun, bright and impossibly warm, hit my face. It was so dazzling I had to stop and close my eyes for a second. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of people walking by, it all sounded different, like a piece of music I was hearing for the first time. I stood there on the pavement, holding the box of my old life, and felt the heavy, invisible chains I had been wearing for 30 years simply fall away and shatter on the concrete. I was free. What is the price of a stage? Not the wooden platform, but the one you build for yourself, inside your own life. I learned that the price is silence, a profound, echoing silence that settled over my world the day after I walked out of my parents' house. My phone, once a source of constant, low-grade familial anxiety, became a perfectly still, quiet object on my kitchen counter. The first 2 days, I told myself they just needed time to cool off. On the third day, I broke down and called my mother. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice flat and distant, stripped of all its usual warmth. "Hello, Elizabeth." Not Ellie, Elizabeth. "Hi, Mom. I was just calling to see how you were doing." There was a pause, a void of static on the line where a question about my own well-being should have been. "I'm fine," she said finally. "And Dad?" I asked, my voice getting smaller. "He's fine." Fine. The word was a wall. I tried one more time. "Look, Mom, about the other day." She cut me off, her voice still perfectly level. "I have to go, Elizabeth. The roast is burning." Click. The dial tone was louder than anything she had said. That night, a cold curiosity got the better of me. I opened my social media, a place I usually avoided. I typed Jessica's name into the search bar. Her profile, usually a vibrant collage of artistic headshots and inspirational quotes about the craft, was gone. In its place was a blank page with a single brutal button, Add Friend. I had been unfriended, blocked. I then searched for Aunt Carol. The same result. It wasn't a slow fade, it was an amputation, a deliberate, coordinated severing of all ties. They hadn't just walked away. They had built a digital fortress and left me on the outside. The silence in my apartment became a living thing. It sat with me at breakfast. It followed me from room to room. In its suffocating presence, I finally understood. Their love had never been a gift. It had been a contract. And I had just violated the terms and conditions. The primary clause, written in invisible ink on every birthday card and holiday greeting, was that I was to remain the understudy. My role was to provide quiet, off-stage support, to be the reliable, non-threatening background character who made the star's life easier. The moment I claimed my own spotlight, I had broken the contract. The love was withdrawn. To survive the silence, I turned to the only voices that wouldn't leave me, the ones in my head. I opened my laptop and created a new document, titling it The Gilded Cage, the sequel to my first book. I dove back into the world of Lady Annalise. I spent my days in 19th century England, orchestrating spy rings and courtly intrigues. My characters became my new family. They didn't demand anything from me except my imagination. They didn't judge me. They simply waited for me to tell them what happened next. The loneliness was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but the work was its antidote. The work was my salvation. I was losing a family, but I was finally, truly, finding myself. Have you ever met a stranger who knows your soul better than your own family? For 6 months, the silence from my relatives had been my constant companion. It was a thick, heavy blanket I had learned to live under. My book, The Silk Cage, had been released into the world 2 months prior. I saw the positive reviews online, glowing words from anonymous critics that felt like ghosts, whispering encouragement from another room. It was validating, yes, but also strangely abstract, like reading a weather report about a sunny day while you're stuck in a windowless basement. My new office was a corner table at a coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. The smell of roasted coffee beans and the low murmur of conversations had replaced the sterile hum of my old accounting firm. I was working on the sequel, deep in a chapter where Lady Annalise had to forge a letter to the king, when a shadow fell over my laptop screen. I looked up to see a young woman, maybe 20 years old, clutching a well-worn copy of my book to her chest as if it were a holy text. Her eyes were wide. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but are you Elizabeth Vance?" I was so startled that for a moment I couldn't speak. No one had ever recognized me before. "Yes," I said, a small, surprised smile forming on my face. "I am." The girl's face lit up with a brilliant, unadulterated joy that was so pure it almost hurt to look at. "Oh my God, I knew it. I just wanted to say, your book, The Silk Cage. I've read it 3 times. Lady Annalise. The way she has to be so quiet and careful, but you can feel how much she's screaming on the inside. I feel like I know her. I feel like you wrote her just for me." Her words hit me with the force of a physical impact. She hadn't mentioned the sales figures. She hadn't asked about the movie rights. She hadn't said a word about the $50,000 advance. She spoke of my character, of the secret, internal world I had painstakingly built over years of lonely nights. She saw the art, not the transaction. My family saw a winning lottery ticket. This girl, this complete stranger, saw my soul. And in that moment, sitting in a noisy cafe, the truth hit me with the force of a tidal wave, washing away the last dregs of loneliness and doubt. I mumbled my thanks, signed her book with a trembling hand, and watched as she floated out of the cafe, clutching it like a treasure. I looked around at the other patrons, all strangers, lost in their own worlds. I had lost the family I was born into, a family that had only ever seen me as a supporting character in someone else's story. But this girl, and the thousands of other people like her who might one day read my words and feel seen, they were my real family. I had not been writing into a void. I had been writing letters to them all along, and they were finally starting to arrive. Do you know the color of a dream that comes true? It's not gold or silver. It's the deep, impossible blue of Lake Michigan on a clear morning, viewed from the window of a small apartment that is entirely your own. It has been 1 year since I walked out of my old life. My new routine is simple. I wake up, I make coffee, and I sit at my desk, the one that doesn't face a beige fabric wall but a horizon that seems to go on forever. And I write. I am halfway through the second book of a 3-book deal. The story flows. The silence from my family eventually broke, not with a bang, but with a slow, hesitant trickle. My mother calls me once a week now. The conversations are brief, carefully navigated minefields of neutral topics. She asks about my work, her voice still holding a note of bewilderment, as if she were asking about my recent trip to the moon. How is the, uh, manuscript coming along? She'll ask. We don't talk about Jessica. We don't talk about money. This is the new foundation, built on the solid ground of my boundaries. It's not perfect, but it is real. It was during one of those calls that my mother mentioned it, her tone casual, as if she were discussing the weather. Carol says Jessica quit that acting school. She's waiting tables at some fancy restaurant now. She paused, then added, Someone told Carol she's been taking a night class. Screenwriting, I think. I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure. Just a quiet, somber sense of a circle closing. The star had grown tired of performing. She was finally trying to write her own script. Then, last Tuesday, as I was staring at the lake, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart didn't even jolt. I assumed it was spam. But when I looked at the screen, I saw a short, sharp sentence under a name I hadn't seen in a year. It was from Jessica. I read the words once, then twice, letting them sink in. Read your book. It's cool. Maybe you can tell me how you found an agent? It was blunt. It was direct. And it was everything. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the words on the screen. It wasn't an apology. There was no mention of the phone calls, the tears, the emotional blackmail. But in its own way, it was more than an apology. It was a concession. It was an acknowledgement. She wasn't asking for money. She was asking for professional advice, from one writer to another. The understudy was no longer just a source of funds. She was a source of information. A colleague. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. The peace it gave me was instantaneous. I looked at the screen of my own laptop, at the chapter I was building, at the world that was mine. The old wounds were still there, pale scars that would likely never fade completely, but they no longer ached. Jessica's message was not an olive branch. It was a white flag. It was her finally admitting that my stage was real and asking for directions to build her own. And for me, that was more than enough to finally and completely turn the page.